Hi, let's talk about developing stories, an epic adventure for our gamification project. I know that for some of us, we feel like, oh, I'm just not creative. That's just really not my skill set. I don't know how to write stories. Well, we're going to give you a ton of tools in both this mission, and then once you get into the game board in level 2, Dead Men Tell No Tales, you'll also get some other nifty, great tools that you'll be able to use immediately to start developing your stories. The great news is you do not have to start with a blank page. There's so many places that you can go get ideas, and I want to show you just a couple now. I've had an opportunity to design a number of programs covering a variety of topics for my clients, and I've been doing this since 2008. And as I've added the gamification overlay to it, I've kept it pretty simple because we were still doing mostly instructor-led training. We were doing some blended, but for the most part it was instructor-led. So when I show you these, know that's the perspective that we're coming from. However, you can use the concept no matter what style of learning and training that you're delivering. So let's start with Snow White. This was one that a payroll law company had contacted me that they had recently purchased a payroll company. Actually, the company was a back office human resources, and they were adding payroll to their mix. So they wanted to train their employees, about 200. They had agents across the country who sold their services to clients, and of course they had their current clients that they wanted to show them some of their new services. So they had a SME, an attorney, who wrote the payroll law class. The challenge was it was pretty dull, tedious, really boring. So what we did was we created an allegory. We made a story about Snow White. She's the new HR administrator at the mine, and she had a variety of characters that she worked with. And the cool thing was that we were able to tie in Snow White and the characters into the training. When we learned about wage garnishment, we brought in Grumpy Gus. Everybody's got a Grumpy Gus at work. The guy that, no, that's not going to work. Oh, it's going to be a disaster. So everyone can relate to Grumpy, but perhaps they don't know why he's grumpy. In our allegory that we wrote, we made Grumpy Gus grumpy because he's on his third marriage. He's having to pay child support to the first two, and by the time his wages are garnished, he is taking home the minimum we're required by law to send with him. So no wonder he's grumpy. We used Dopey Dan. Dopey Dan was the boss's son. We're not sure what exactly he does, but we're pretty sure he's misclassified because he's classified as executive exempt, and I don't even think that he should be more than an hourly employee based on what he does. So when we looked at the classification of hourly versus exempt versus non-exempt, we were able to use Dopey Dan in our scenarios. I think my favorite is the Huntsman. See, the queen was pretty detailed when she told the huntsman what she wanted him to do with Snow White. Take her deep into the forest, distract her. When she's not paying attention, I want you to take a knife and carve out her heart and put it in this box and bring it back to me. Detailed step by step. So, does that make the huntsman an independent contractor or an employee of the queen? Well, that's an area we need to make sure that we know what it is, the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. Because since the downturn of '08, a lot of companies have had to let employees go, but they've brought them back in as independent contractors. And could they really pass the stringent IRS test on whether they really are an independent contractor? I mean, I don't know. Does the huntsman do this for other queens? Or does he have a billboard up in the woods? Or is this just something he does as part of the chores he does for the queen? We use stories like this throughout the 6-hour training, and it turned from dull and boring and brought something that could resonate with the learners in the room so that they could understand the concept of payroll law. Another one that I did was a QMT, Qualified Maintenance Technician, for a crane company. And we'll just run this video. There's not really any sound, but we wanted to open and use real life scenarios in our design so that the guys who are going through this QMT training would understand the weight of not fully doing their job. Ooh. Ugh. Now, I did have to bleep the video for class because it did have some words in it that we really needed to make sure we got out of there. And because it's a real life tragedy, people could lose life and limb. And so we wanted to make sure that we designed it so that there'd be choice and consequences. Choice and then some other things happening and not knowing until a little bit later what the consequence might be. So it was a real fun course to design. Our little guy over here, this is JD. He's the gentleman that had the information. He was the SME. And so we made him the hero or the ambassador of the course, and he led us through the training. It was a combination of some online, and then also instructor-led. Another one of my favorites that I was able to design for a client is this ancient grandma's grammar. Now, this was for a gentleman who does business grammar, business writing classes. Again, I'm thinking not too thrilling for me, but it's a necessity because how we speak and write in today's business environment is not what we learned in school. And so to make sure that everyone's up to date and using the right techniques for writing and speaking, communicating in the workplace, we designed this ancient grandma's grammar. It was it can be delivered as either a 3 or 6 hour instructor-led class. We did blend it. We followed it up with some reinforcement where they had brief webinars that they could participate in afterwards. He did a series of, I believe it was 6 webinars that they could do as reinforcement following up the class, because in something like grammar, we really want to make sure that they got it. Did they really get it? This is one of my favorites. Of course, they're always my favorite, but this is draft day. We were contacted by a huge multinational food and beverage company whose leadership is basically white middle-aged men, and they were doing a diversity training for leadership of basically white middle-aged men. And so we just did it based on draft day. This movie had just come out, and I'm watching the movie thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. We're going to let them draft their team. We made those big giant heads, and they got to draft their team. They had time restrictions, money restrictions, a limit of different positions they could pick. Things aren't always as they appear. And they had a preseason, a season, and then a postseason. And because of the demographic of who we were writing for, it really was a hit for them, because when you look at the fantasy football, fantasy sports, okay, fantasy sports has a trade association. It's like an $8 billion a year business, something like that overall. Are you kidding me? Between sponsorships and the people that are playing. So there's definitely an interest. And when you think about who your players will be, you always want to design for them. So that's just a few ideas.